And I do want to do a little bit of housekeeping, so I'm going to briefly share my screen, if you don't mind. All right, so what you likely will look at is the enable editing version of this slide. Here we go. A little bit of housekeeping. We're going to be looking at our breakout session today, and please do know that you have access to the Zoom chat so you can share your wonderings, your comments and questions. After the session, we will direct you to the Whova community boards to share insights and takeaways and also make connections with your colleagues across the city. You'll also learn how to make your way to the next session. Do know that you have your mics on mute for the time being, but you will be alerted when you have opportunities to speak and unmute yourself. Cameras on. It'd be great for your facilitators to engage with you and see who you are, but on or off, it's your choice. And again, the session is being recorded. So I'll stop sharing my screen and allow for our facilitators to take over. We have with us today a session titled Writing Home, Text Choice and Latinx Representation in the ELA Classroom. Our facilitators today are Topher Kendick, Maya Lawrence, and Christy Donosco. I am going to turn my video off so that I'm not a distraction, but please do sit back and enjoy the session.
All right. Thank you and welcome everybody. I'm a little nervous to look down the list and see who all's here because I was looking at everybody's bios beforehand, and it's really impressive to get together in a group of like-minded individuals and be able to listen and present with each other and learn from each other. So that's kind of my goal for the presentation today. And in order to start us off, I have a little question, and this is a genuine wondering too, because this presentation is about representation in the classroom and text choice. So let me get to my next slide here. If I can do this. All right, here we go. So, and feel free to, I think we can, for this part, we can unmute if you want to, or use the chat. And flashing back to my year of virtual teaching, I'm much more facile with using the chat than out loud, because most of my students, for some reason, would rather type their responses and their discussions rather than speak it out loud last year. But my question is, what's your experience with teaching Latinx authors to high school students? And if you're not a teacher, because I know a lot of folks here are not necessarily in the classroom right now, what Latinx authors did you read when you were in high school? So wondering if you had a robust experience with that, or if that's something that wasn't quite as robust. So feel free to, I think you can unmute yourself for these first 10 minutes or so, and then, or put it in the chat. Who wants to break the ice? Okay, Julia Alvarez, Sandra Cisneros. Of course, those are two of the giants that are taught. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to keep up with all this. I see Ms. Jones, you're saying you haven't taught specific authors. Dr. Emilius, can't think of a single Latinx author I read in high school, but 10th grade DCPS reads Reina Grande. And that's my experience too, and I'm gonna say this later in in the presentation, but as a white high school student, I didn't read, I only read white authors, and mostly male too. And I think part of the motivation for a class in this presentation in general is that I think that's something that that of course needs to be changed, but also is kind of becomes lazy if that's what you learn and then that's what you teach. And I think one way to reimagine literacy, like the convening is called, is to do it in a way that is that's fresh and new. Let's see what else people are saying. Sandra Cisneros again, Julia Alvarez, and these this is kind of what I was thinking people would say, like not a lot of variety, if any, Latinx voices, and then a few of the literary giants, who of course are great to read and teach. Lacey says she only also mostly read white males authors. Tia Loa from Howard. Tia Lola, sorry. Marquez. And Marquez is that's a tough one. I don't think I encountered Marquez until college, and I would be intimidated to teach some of his longer work anyway. Angela, I want you to know you're not just a participant. You are you're a valued member of the discussion today. Didn't read any. And so this is, if I'm observing right, if I'm reading this right, we're getting towards a consensus here on most people either didn't read any or didn't read many. Holly Cobb says she's taught Judith Ortiz Cofer, which is great. Gary Soto, again, is somebody who's who's kind of everywhere, rightfully so. And I love how we can read stories and poetry from Gary Soto, and it even in high school. Like I sometimes think of him more in middle grades, but he has a lot to teach us as well. Well, thanks everybody for sharing. So I think I'm going to dig in, and we'll start with the agenda right now. So we just kind of did the icebreaker, and if anyone doesn't have anything else to add in, Isabel Allende, of course, is another one of the literary giants. House of Spirits. One of the books that I teach, just a random association here, is The Undocumented Americans. I teach in this course, and in the beginning, the author says that she's from, Christy, you might get a kick out of this, she's from Ecuador, and she says it's not a very famous place, and in fact, even the literary movements missed our country, which she kind of plays as a joke. So we'll talk a little bit about naming first, because I want to recognize that as a white teacher and as a white person in general, there's some linguistic dancing that I need to do, and it's not easy to do. We'll talk with Maya about Penn Faulkner, and then Christy, who's our writer in residence this year. And then I'm just going to kind of put the syllabus out there before we have a general discussion about whether this can be improved, whether this is a good idea, and other impressions that you have. So I'll start out with this naming note and put it here for that it's complicated in general. Students whose home language is Spanish and come from places like Mexico and Central America, the Caribbean, other parts of Latin America, in my experience, don't agree on a single name. And I'll be referencing a charter board quality report that refers to students as Hispanic and Latino, but those terms are fraught in my experience as well. Hispanic because of the roots in the Spanish Empire, and then Latino with its gender preferences, both have become a little problematic. So the idea of Latinx or saying Latinx or Latina has been a little more popular in academic settings. And I chose to go with that, even though, and this makes me cringe a little bit, even though my students would never refer to themselves that way. They don't say I'm a Latinx student. But for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to use that term to talk about all these different peoples and the literatures and stories of these peoples together. All right, so I teach at a charter school called EL Haynes. We're on Kansas Avenue in Petworth. And when I started at EL Haynes 5 years ago, we were a predominantly African-American school. And I taught for a decade at an exclusively African-American school called SEED Public Charter School. And so I was there for 10 years. And when I came to Haynes, teaching African-American literature is the stories and the literature that I've been most comfortable with. My whole teaching career was organized around teaching and finding representation in books and stories for my students who are African American. But as you can see from this slide, Haynes has changed quite a bit. And the story of the change at Haynes starts before I started at Haynes. And so if you look at back to 2012 and 2013, so this is approximately the last decade, the student population at Haynes has changed from about 33% students identified, and this is the charter board's report and naming, students identified as Hispanic and Latino, to in 2019 and 20, the most recent report, close to 60%. And that's a really big change. And I think that has, and presumably you'll agree, that has ramifications, not just in the English classroom, in the books that we teach, but who are we, what teachers are we putting in front of students, and centering teachers who are bilingual, who can speak more directly to students of Latinx descent. But schools in general and school systems, I suspect are it's even tougher, aren't particularly nimble about moving, about changing. But as classroom teachers, I think we have a real opportunity to lead that change. And in a charter school, and I know this is a little different in DCPS, but in a charter school, I have a little more autonomy about the books I'm teaching, and I've thought a lot about how the books I choose are a political choice. And so this has caused me a few years ago to really start thinking more about how much representation matters. And so, as I said before, I'm a white teacher who grew up seeing myself in the books that I read in the English classroom. And I don't think that's the only reason that I became that I love, reading, but it became very natural for me. And when I was at Seed and now at Haynes, I know my students would not necessarily have the same reaction to being taught almost exclusively white male writers. So the more exploring I did, and I found some great partners, and we'll hear from Maya in a second, but Penn Faulkner has been doing the same thing, looking for writers of color, and in this particular instance, Latinx writers, to speak to and to tell their stories to students. And so if you guys haven't done, if you've never been a part of the National Endowment for the Humanities summer seminars, they have amazing summer seminars. And last summer, I took one, and you get paid to go to school. So for those of us who love reading and who love school in general, the National Endowment for the Humanities will give you a stipend to take a class. And they had an amazing seminar last summer called Tales from the Chihuahuan Desert, Borderlands Narratives. And through that seminar, I really started to distill some of my ideas about representation and hone and talk to some experts about this, and hear what they have to say. So David Bowles, who's a Penn Faulkner writer and school writer as well, he's visited classrooms, I think here in DC. He wrote the book They Call Me Güero, which is about a boy who grows up on the border of El Paso and Juarez. And he said this, and it really stuck with me. He said, teachers, and referring to teachers who don't identify as Latinx or even binational, so teachers like me who are white teachers, he said, teachers who can't offer testimonial can use texts that center the identities and voices of these students. And that was really powerful for me, because, you know, I have a little bit of a sensitivity to the idea that as a white teacher, I'm not trying to tell students what to think about their culture. And I was interviewed about this class once, and the interviewer asked me about that. And that would be a kind of a misunderstanding of what I'm trying to do. What I want to do is put stories in front of these students, stories that matter. And from there, students can see themselves and feel part of this great kind of community and culture of reading and literature. So this whole thing came together with all this stuff in mind. And as I started looking around, I knew, and I've worked with Penn Faulkner since I started teaching a long time ago, over a decade, about 15 years ago. And I knew Penn Faulkner was thinking some of the same things. Previously, I have brought a lot of authors to my classroom, but as Penn Faulkner started their Nuestras, Voces program, I thought this might be a great opportunity to kind of ramp up a class that's organized around these stories. And so I'm going to let Maya Lawrence talk a little bit about what Penn Faulkner is and how great they are in the classroom. And I could go on and on about this in general, but let me have Maya talk and tell you exactly what Penn Faulkner does if you're not familiar.
That amazing introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Lawrence. I work with the Penn Faulkner Foundation. I am the Literary Education Programs Assistant, and I'm really excited to be here with you all today. So we have 4 main education programs at Penn Faulkner: Writers in Schools, Nuestras, Voces, writing workshops, and of course, Writers in Residence. I have some photos here from some of our school author visits this year, located at Sousa Middle School, Simon Elementary School, Kelly Miller, and Bruce Monroe Elementary School. So I hope you enjoy. WINS is the first education program Penn Faulkner began with. It started with 1 school and 1 educator over 30 years ago. Now, great privilege to have worked with 41 schools and 59 educators in DC in the 2020-21 school year. In both our first program and Nuestras Voces, our newest program, which is a program that works to amplify Latinx stories and writers, we donate at no cost to the schools books and bring in authors for virtual in and out.
You may simply want to just put yourself closer to your device's microphone.
Aaron. Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes.
WINS, our first program, and Nuestras Voces, which is our newest program, that is a program that works to amplify Latina, Latinx stories and writers. And we donate at no cost to the schools, books, and bring in the authors for virtual and in-person author visits. Also, Nuestras Voces provides students with Spanish and English books. And programming offers 20% of our overall educational programming and has become a true through line connection point for all of our educational programming. Also in the past year, Penn Faulkner has been able to donate more than 3,700 books to the students of DC. Students typically from 3rd to 12th grade, and the schools we partner with are predominantly Title I. We are always trying to expand our capacity to do more and connect with more schools and students. One of our other programs is writing workshops, which focuses on fiction as well as nonfiction creative writing classes with our Lisa Page Fellow this year, Faith Campbell. Shout out, Faith. Finally, Writers in Residence is a more long-term and intensive writing program. It is a direct collaboration between a teacher and a writer who serves as a teaching artist for the school year. And I'll let Topher and Christy really go into depth in what a collaboration like this entails. And yeah. I would personally share a few author visit moments that reminded me how we're able to prioritize representation for the students, but also why it's really important for us to do so. I was on a visit at Sousa Middle School with author and poet Kundwani Fidel. Kundwani, who is a Baltimore native, went into the devastating effects of police brutality, mass incarceration, police corruption in Baltimore. And a former cop, corrupt cop, mentioned in his book, The Anti-Racist, who is now incarcerated for his crimes. And as Kundwani shares one of the moments that the ex-cop was abusing his authority by stopping citizens, there are police sirens wailing in the district in the background through the school windows. All glued to Kundwani, and when the sirens began to fade out, I noticed how quiet the students became in the classroom. About their own experiences with racial profiling in DC. And one student says, you know, when people get off the highway and everyone's driving really fast, but they pull over someone after someone else already went by going just as fast. I feel like you can choose who they go after. Sounds like you're describing racial profiling. And kind of began to grudgingly nod their heads. And I think about this powerful moment of sharing vulnerability and reflection of the injustice in our country. And this is why representation, especially in classrooms, matter. These students had a safe space with an author, a Penn Faulkner ambassador, and an educator who looked like them, and were able to openly share their feelings about a difficult topic like race. I would like to share was with author David Bowles for our Nuestras Voces programming. David spoke about his book, The Sea-Ringed World, which is about myths and folklore in the Americas. A group in the Americas whose stories and culture has traditionally been erased in our country and in the literacy world. Even students visit whose first language was Spanish were unfamiliar with the majority of myths or words David translated in his work. And I'm reminded of the importance of offering an inclusive book catalog for our programming. I graduated high school 7 years ago and read no contemporary authors of color. And I think it's pretty amazing what our programming is able to do with 80% of our authors being people of color, especially knowing that less than 10% of authors that are published in the US are of color. to witness and be a part of and share these moments with students who are getting experience that I could only dream of. On a personal note, one of my favorite experiences is being in the classroom and when young Black girls tell me they like my hair, or like, how did I get my hair so curly? And in my middle school and high school, almost all my teachers were white men and women, and I certainly did not have teachers who had similar hair to me. And while a smaller example of the representation we hope to bring into the classroom, it's still an impactful reminder for me as to why it's so important. So that being said, again, we always wish we were able to do more, but I want to truly thank you so much for your time and for having me today. And if you're interested in any of our educational programs, please feel free to reach out to our Director of Education Programs, Lacey, or myself. Lacey's email is lacey@pennfaulkner.org, or you can visit our website, pennfaulkner.org. So again, I just want to thank you so much, and I will turn it back over to Topher. Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. And I can vouch for these moments when there's Penn Faulkner writers in the classroom and how powerful it is, and how students feel connected and really reached when these writers are talking to them about the craft of writing and about the stories that that they've written. So it's an amazing program, and I feel so grateful to be able to be a partner with Penn Faulkner. And so I'm just going to pause on this slide for a second if you want to take a picture or write down the Lacey's email address to become involved with Penn Faulkner if you haven't already, and I imagine many of you already have. But it's a lot of work, really, but it's very much worth it. And one other program that Penn Faulkner has really kind of assisted and help this class out is by providing a writer in residence. So you'll hear from Christy in a second, but she has been a valuable resource this year because she's working with students on, we're going to publish a book of essays. We're going to talking about getting stories in front of students so they feel confident in putting their own story out there, so they feel part of the conversation. And one way to do that is to publish their writing and to effectively tell them that your writing matters in the same way and deserves to be published. And Christy's really done a wonderful job speaking with the students one-on-one and pushing them towards taking themselves more seriously as writers and thinkers, and to take their stories more seriously as well. So she's going to share her background and experience and her perspective about the students in this Writing Home course, and I'll let her voice do that because she's going to do it better than me.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Hello, everyone. So my name is Christy Donoso. I have been really honored to be the writer in residence for Topher's Writing Home course this year. I think we have a slide, Topher, if you wouldn't mind going forward.
Got you.
Or maybe it's just my screen stuck on the picture. Did it change for you? I'm still seeing the same one. Maybe it's just me.
Can someone put in the chat? Are you seeing it? Because on mine it looks like the book, a map is only one story is up. Oh.
Okay, it's not just me.
Let me re-share here.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh yeah, look at that.
Yay. Okay, we got it. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Actually, if you would go one back to the creative writing labs. Yeah.
Now you're asking for a.
I'm asking for too much.
Hold on. Let me stop again. I don't know.
Sorry, all. Well, I will talk about the text. So we were really lucky that when I sort of began to think about what this course would entail and talk to Topher, we were really lucky that Faulkner provided us every student copy of this text that we had. And it's called A Map is Only One Story. And there's a specific essay in this book that, thank you, yay, Topher. So just the next one is good. There's a specific essay where the writer Jamila Osman says, a map is only one story. The most important story is the one that people tell about themselves. And so I wanted to really bring this idea to the students, because I think a lot of times when your culture is underrepresented, it's just as likely to be misrepresented. And so the story that the map tells, the story that the history book tells, a lot of times we're sort of told to accept that as our story. And so the idea behind this course was really that the students would be able to take ownership of their stories, not just in what they tell, but how they tell it. And so Topher, as the language arts teacher, was really flexible in letting us do things a little bit differently for this course, so that we could have that as our ethos going into it. Oh yeah, that works. I think the creative writing labs, Topher one. Yeah, I think maybe I had it flipped on mine. Perfect, thank you. Okay, so we had some guiding principles for this course. First and foremost was that the students would have ownership over their work. And in order to make that happen, we wanted to deviate a little bit from the usual academic writing assignments. First would be that all languages would be accepted. And thankfully we had, I can read their Spanish work, but I also wanted them, if they have other languages that they speak at home, to include those, and that they could use informal non-academic language that was closer to the way that they spoke. And all of that would be possible if they are allowed to consider that the audience for their writing is somebody who knows them and knows their culture. So instead of writing for me, for Mr. Candick, they're thinking, I'm writing for somebody who, if I say this word that is a Spanish word or an indigenous language, that they would just know what that was, and just to have the freedom to write from that place of knowing your audience, instead of writing for a white audience or an audience that's not familiar with your culture. So those were really important points. And Topher students are they're very conscientious, and they want to follow the rules, and they want to do well. And so we've just tried really hard to tell them, you actually can break the rules for this work. So we told them that we were going to have an experimental focus. I think a lot of times when we ask students to write about themselves, they also have the pressure of writing towards their academic goals, and it's very hard to get them to think about writing as practice. And so I've tried very hard to tell them, this is experimental. We can write something that makes no sense. We can write something we're not happy with and throw it out and start over. And they were also allowed to deviate from our assignments if they felt like they had an idea or were inspired to do something a little bit different. Along with the experimental focus, if they wanted to use non-standard grammar, non-standard syntax, they were allowed to take sort of some of the rules of poetry, kind of moving, even though they were writing essays, moving into any kind of language that felt comfortable for them.
I'm sorry.
And then
Chris,
that's okay. No, yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna get this right.
Yeah, we're so close. Okay, there we go. So the next one should be it.
I can't move it forward though, so I gotta.
Oh, you got to do it one by one. Okay, well, I'll look at the next one. So we talked a little bit about the text. And so the process that we had for the students was they would read an essay from the model text. And the book does have a lot of Latinx authors included, but it also has other authors of color who have written about their perspective as with migration, with trying to understand their concept of home. And so I like that too, because it sort of helps our students see, we're not the only ones who struggle with these ideas. This is something that a lot of people of color can share. And so they would read the model text. we would then go, yes, you got it. We would then discuss and break down whatever narrative strategy we were focusing on that week. And really in class, because it's so hard to write about yourself and open up, we would break down the skill to the point that they would have either a lot of brainstorming or an organization, a structure already sort of created for them. And so then when they started drafting in class, they had a lot of raw material to work with. And so we had them really break down the skills to smaller component parts so that it was a little less scary to get started. Okay, next one. We're doing great. So some of the narrative skills that we addressed, of course, audience, and we took all these, you know, with representation in mind. So for audience, it's the audience of choice. For voice, it's what sort of voice do you want to put into this essay? Do you want to use the one you use at school, the one you use at home, the one you use on the bus? And knowing that, especially for our Latinx students, that a lot of times they're code switching and they have all these different sort of selves that they have to present at different times of their life. They also worked on just traditional sort of nonfiction and fiction skills like setting, character, action, building scenes, word choice, and descriptive details. And then we also let them or encourage them to use borrowed forms. So we kind of did experimental things like writing an essay as a to-do list. Some students did start to innovate and like they wrote essays from the perspective of an object of theirs rather than about the object they owned. And so I think as the year has gone on, more and more students have started to do their own innovation, which has been really great to see. And they're just in the last couple of weeks, they're choosing which of their draft essays they would like to revise for our anthology. And like Topher said, this is a lot about showing them that their work matters and that they should be proud of what they've been able to do. They've shown courage and vulnerability. They've gained a lot of writing skills. And so being able to tell their stories and hold them in a final product is hopefully going to be something that's really meaningful to them. And I want to give them as much ownership as possible over this. We're going to talk about the title. Hopefully we'll have student art on the cover and that sort of thing. And then just a few special considerations before I wrap my part up. Because we're asking in this class specifically, we're talking about migration and home and the meaning of home. We know that work is very personal. We want to be really careful that we're not asking students to relive difficult or traumatizing experiences if that's not something they want to dive into. So that's been one reason that we've provided a lot of freedom in terms of content choice and topic choice. And for a few students were allowed to deviate completely from an assignment if they didn't feel comfortable tackling something head on. And so that has actually turned out wonderful because students have turned in some really interesting experimental work that represents who they are, even if it's not on theme. And so we've just been really welcoming of that. And last but not least, we've been trying to focus on prompts that include both positive and negative life narratives, because I do think that as a culture, we expect sort of struggle narratives from people of color and from Latinx students. And we wanted to give them the freedom to write about what they love about their life, what they love about the country they came from or that their family comes from. And so it's been really beautiful to see students write about their family, about their culture, about places that they're from in a really loving, celebratory way. So we wanted to welcome that as well and not have our students feel like they owed us difficult stories. So these are the considerations we had in mind. And I think overall, we're happy with the way it's turning out. And I've learned so much and just been really lucky to have this experience with Topher students. So thank you.
And thanks, Christy. And our students are lucky to have you too, because as you said before, at the beginning of the year, this is a well, you didn't say this, but this is a 10th grade honors class.
Yes.
And a lot of them are used to saying, okay, what do I need to do? Let me check a box, and then that's good writing. But it's really forced our young writers to think differently about what they're putting on a page. And I think in the long, it's a little scary at first to experiment with writing and get away from this formulaic formula that they've been taught. But that's not how our brain works all the time. And it's great to see the writing reflect more what's going on in their brain than forcing it into a certain format or a certain box, like 5 paragraphs or whatever. So, in the long run, I think this is really expanding the way they think about reading and writing, in addition to the representation piece that we have here. So, even with the idea that Penn Faulkner has all these great assets that they can help out with, I still had the need to design the class, because if I'm not mistaken, and this is a very experimental class. I'm not sure there is a template out there for a high school English class that only reads Latinx writers. And so I had to do a lot of research with colleagues of mine in the English department who identify as Latinx and had great recommendations. Penn Faulkner, with other writers, just going through libraries and book lists and talking to people as well, to put together what I hope would be a meaningful class. And so many people gave me input, and I started to see themes come up. And this idea of home was one of the big things. And I knew I wanted it to be writing focused. So that's where the idea of writing home comes from. It's a little bit of a play on that, of words, of like when you're somewhere and you write home, like if you're at college and you write home, or if you're on vacation and you write home. And I wanted students to start thinking about the kind of complexity of what home could mean, especially for people who identify as binational or as people who have come to the United States during their lifetime. Home is extremely complicated. And this is an idea that I picked up from a lot of the literature, and not only that we read in class, but that I read kind of as research for the class too. And then, of course, a curriculum that has a writing focus to take advantage of talented writers like Christy. So there's a Nahuatl word called tlatali, which means, it means word or language, but it also is bigger than that. It encompasses this idea of story and history and discourse all in one, like an informed discussion, kind of like what I hope we'll have at the very end of this session. But it really made me start to think about how a class can be organized around discussion as well. And so I kind of organized into 3 different categories. One called Coming to America, and this was like a migration story. And I'll give you a look at the text we read in a second. And I wish I could talk for an hour about every text. But then another one is an idea of borders. And this is something that came from the NEH seminar that I did last year too, and how borders are sometimes bigger than just physical borders. And we also, for people who have never been to the US border of El Paso and Juarez, we all have borders in our lives. And so this becomes a metaphorical border as well as the physical barrier of getting into the United States. And then finally, what's life in America like? So we're in the third of this now. We're just starting that. We're reading Carla Cornejo Villavicencio's book, The Undocumented Americans, about life for people in the US who don't have papers, and how difficult it is, and how this is an untold story that needs to be told. And as we kind of wrap up, I'll go through the syllabus for a few minutes, but as we wrap up, I want to note that the syllabus is really a work in progress because this is only the second year I've taught it. And it's really only the first year I've taught it live in front of students, because last year when I taught it, we were doing virtual work, and as many of you know, it was hard to get like as much work done. So it's become a lot more robust this year. And I said, as much as we may be tempted to write a curriculum and then have it for the next year, the best way for me to approach curriculum writing is to think, what else can I be adding? How can I change things up? What input from experts can I get that'll make it a more dynamic and a more kind of moving class for my students as they experience like an English classroom? So here it is. Here's the first third of the class. And I've just put this out here as a sample. Over the summer, before school started, we read the book Drown by Junot Diaz. And I think Drown was a good way to start. I know Junot Diaz is a little bit of a controversial writer, and he's got some very problematic things in this book of short stories, which is brilliant and also frustrating. But it was a good frame because it's about someone who lives in exists in two places and how difficult that can be. Another great book that Penn Faulkner introduced me to and has had Luis Urrea to my classroom to talk to students about is Into the Beautiful North, which is kind of a road trip book about some teenagers who try to sneak into the United States to sneak people back into Mexico. It's it's a really funny but exploring serious issues, like teenage road trip movie or road trip book. And then, this year, because of COVID, we couldn't integrate the Latin American Film Festival, which takes place at AFI, the American Film Institute, each year. But last year we were able to screen some movies from the Latin American Film Festival, and it just makes me think of all the great resources in this area that we can be partnering with. The second one, Borders, is kind of organized around this Louis Selle book, Tell Me How It Ends. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Louis Selle, she wrote a book. She took the intake form that she was translating as part of the documentation process for immigrants who have crossed into the United States, and she takes those questions. It's called an essay in 40 questions, and she uses it as almost like a thought experiment to talk about the immigration process. And she's and as you know, all these writers are contemporary writers. She really speaks directly to students about that.
Topher, we have some questions for you in the chat. One question is, what are the WIDA levels of your students?
Okay. Let me say about 2 more minutes or 1 more minute of stuff, and then I want to do some chat. So let's start with that question.
Sure.
And I want to say one thing about Javier Zamora. We're going to be meeting with him next week to read Unaccompanied, which is a poetic memoir. And again, this idea of playing with form is really important in telling these stories in different forms. And then finally, this is the last thing I say, and then we can talk about questions and stuff. The Undocumented Americans and these essays by Janine Cabo-Cruzet, My Time Among the Whites, is also like a funny but scary like reading of how life is in America for her as a Cuban American. And we wrap up with these lit circles that we haven't done yet, but I'm looking forward to. All right, so I'm sorry to cut off the question. Let's get right to it. I'm going to stop my share right now. And then thanks for the question about the WIDA levels. We use the reading levels that we use are we test for Lexile levels, and students are at a range. This is an honors course, and I think some of these books are really complex. So they score a little bit higher than our average student at Haynes, but I was actually looking at the numbers for Lexile levels, and believe it or not, it's not that different. I would say they range from what would typically be like an 8th grade, 9th grade to, up to like through high school reading levels.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We have one other question. First, a compliment, wonderful layering with film and writing, and then a question. Could you please elaborate on the literature circles and how do you introduce those and build them out?
Yeah, this was a really fun project for me last year at the end of the year, and it's something that I wanted to do for a while. So around now, for in a month, we'll start these literature circles. Students will choose a book, and then I try to put as much responsibility and independence on the student in terms of reading the book with their small group. So it'll be about 3 to 5 students reading the same book, and they'll agree on 3 or 4 times to meet and how much will be read each time. One fun thing that's happened at Haynes is a lot of teachers who aren't teaching these books are like, oh man, I love that book, Dominicana. I would love to sit with some students and talk about it. So we've had teachers who have also sat in on these book groups, and as they're reading, I'm doing mini lessons during classes about beginnings of books and looking at character, and a lot of the things actually Christy talked about, voice and those things. And so students are doing exercises with their targeted book, the book that they're reading, in a way as a preparation for the actual conversation they have. And then 4 times as they read the book, they'll meet with one adult, which is, I feel like gravy. It's a total bonus for me. One adult and then the other ones. And the idea is students are driving the conversation. What's important to talk about in these stories?
One question I would love to know the answer to as well is, when is Javier Zamora coming to class, and will you record it and share it with other school students? And I would add to that, OSSE staff.
I would say every author from Penn Faulkner that visits our classroom is worth recording. I don't know if we are recording it or not. There's, I would say probably not, because there's a lot of like permissions, and that sometimes obviously there's issues with sharing students on screen and stuff. Javier Zamora is actually going to be zooming into the classroom. He's not going to be live and in person. He's very busy, so that's going to be an exception. Usually the authors are live, but it's happening April 4th on Monday, April 4th. And I wish I could invite everybody, but we're trying to keep it small. We have about 45 kids in the class, in between 2 sections in the class. So that's a win. And I'm really looking forward to that one. I love meeting all the authors, but that book is really fire.
There's a question about the program. Is it a year-long program?
Talking about the class, yeah, the class itself, Writing Home, is a year-long English class. So the credit for English that they'll get as 10th graders will be through this year-long class.
And is the partnership with Penn Faulkner for the whole course of the year as well?
Yeah, so Christy's here. I think Christy's at 15 times or 18 times that we meet, that you meet with students.
We have it for 15 sessions, but I know that I think that number can flex depending on what's prepared and how the funding works, which is a Lacey and Maya question. But yeah, I think there's flexibility there, but this was planned for 15. Yeah.
And Ms. Jones, we'll talk, because you know, I'd like to talk about it, and we can figure out how to lean on leadership to make it happen for you as well, because it's such an important experience for students.
Thank you, Topher.
Any other questions or suggestions of titles to read? I'm noting, just thinking back to the very beginning, the icebreaker, those the writers that people said that they've read aren't on this syllabus. And of course, it's one of the hardest things is, I'm writing these notes down too. One of the hardest things to do when you're writing a course is take things out. Because you want to, you want so much to be included. But I think editing down a curriculum, or the books that we read for a curriculum, is very important, because if not, it's just a whirlwind and you don't get much of anything.
There are 3 minutes remaining in this session for additional Q&A.
I would like to share, Topher, that when I was in high school, I read Chronicle of a Death Foretold by Garcia, and the introduction to magical realism just like blew my brain, especially as like a person who was a dancer and loved to visually connect with literature. It just really like imploded my mind visually to connect with writing and reading in a different way. So I know he's a big head, but just something to think about.
Yeah, I don't know. As a teacher, I get nervous sometimes. I have links too to the. I did like a little presentation about my experience in the rationale for this class. Thank you so much, everyone. Through the NEH seminar last summer, and then the syllabus as well. So maybe in these last few minutes, I'll just pop those links in the chat, and you can look at those as well.
All right, we should have time for one more question or comment.
You know, if there's no more, let me just say one thing about the Lexile levels, because this is a conversation that we're having right now. And in the presentation, the first presentation was very data driven, you know, and I think sometimes we can get too hung up on what is the level for the student, and not what is the book saying. And so there's kind of I read a Washington Post article recently that was talking about, well, Night, which is typically taught in the 10th grade, or is a kind of a classic 10th grade novel, is a 3rd grade, you know, reading level. And there's all these kind of outlier examples. And so I'm having this battle a little bit right now with some about what is grade appropriate for 10th graders who are on level, but also 10th graders who are struggling and might be brought into being stronger readers if they recognize the story. And is that more important or less important than what the reading level is? So I think all these questions are important ones to kind of to really consider.
Well, this brings us to the end of our session, Writing Home, Text Choice, and Latinx Representation in the ELA Classroom. I would like to thank our facilitators, Topher Kendick, Maya Lawrence, and Christy Donoso for presenting today at the Spring 2022 Aussie Literacy Convening. And also Aussie's own Jennifer Carpenter for moderating the chat box for us. I would like to thank all of you for your commitment to our students and the work that you do each and every day, and for helping to make this virtual convening a success. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see a housekeeping slide that will help direct you as you continue in the convening today. So our housekeeping slide shows that you have a 15-minute break. Make the most of it. You can continue the conversation using the community boards in Whova. To get there, you'll go back to the Whova page and look under the agenda tab to select your next breakout session. which begins in 15 minutes. You can also make your way to the community board by navigating, again, to the left-hand side, you'll see the community tab. You can also start a new topic of conversation to engage with your colleagues here in DC, or join an already existing discussion board. So I hope you have enjoyed this presentation. Thank you all again, and hope you are able to continue on for breakout session 2, which starts at 3:30.